Hello, my dear friends. Today we will read the memoirs of a German soldier. Fritz Langanke served in the Reconnaissance battalion of the SS division Das Reich on the Eastern Front. He fought in the never-seen-before winter battle of Rzhev in 1942. It is also known as the Rzhev Meat Grinder. Rzhev was in the forefront after the successful Soviet counteroffensive near Moscow in December 1941. The battle for Rzhev went on from January 5, 1942 to March 31, 1943, with intervals of 1.5 to 3 months. Over this period, the Red Army conducted 4 offensive operations against the 4th and 9th German Field Armies of the Army Group Center. The purpose of these offensive operations of the Red Army was to encircle and destroy the German Army Group Center, and thereby eliminate the Rzhev-Vyazma Salient. This salient was a threat due to the fact that German forces from it could attempt to assault Moscow again. For this reason, the battles here were extremely violent and intense. The losses of the Red Army in this battle were 1,160,000 soldiers, of whom 392,000 were killed. The losses of the German army killed and wounded were 390,000 soldiers. It ended with the retreat of the 9th Army of the Wehrmacht on March 5, 1943, from the Rzhev-Vyazma Salient. But before we begin, I would like to thank Call of War, the sponsor of this video. Call of War is a free online PvP strategy game about World War II. You have to build your cities, defend and expand your country, manage your resources, and trade with other rulers. Also, master spy missions, create a powerful army and a strong alliance with other players to prepare for the final confrontation. Call of War is cross-platform, so you can compete with your friends on both PC and mobile under the same account to find out who the real conqueror is. Subtle diplomacy or brute force, miracle weapon or weapon of mass destruction, the choice is yours. Follow the link in the description of the video and you will receive an exclusive gift, 13,000 gold and 1 month of premium subscription for free. Offer available for 30 days only, so hurry up. Well, let's start now. After a repair station stop, we drove our 8-wheel armored reconnaissance vehicle from Warsaw through Minsk, Smolensk, and Vyazma, heading for Moscow, until leaving the town of Gajet. We drove on country roads. It was a struggle to get the vehicle to move on Russian roads under the coldest winter of the century. In this town of Gajet, vehicles of all types of the German army stood up, crowding all along the road during the long night of January 19, 1942. Whole mobs of Feldgendarmes tried hopelessly to make an exit from Gajet and to organize the traffic on the bypass roads to the main road. Shouts, screams, and horrible swearing kept a constant accompaniment to this disorderly process. The various automobiles, either stuck in the snow or simply unable to start, were mercilessly thrown off the road. The crossroads of the main highway were kept clear of vehicles, so that the auxiliary units of the forces in the area to the east of Mosalsk could easily reach their needed location. The cold was terrible, and I got off the vehicle together with the machine gunner, trying to warm up by walking a little. To be inside the vehicle when the engine was not running was like being inside a block of ice. We started and then stopped, passing only a few meters, until at last we reached the road exit from Gajet after hours and were about to leave it. I asked the driver to keep to the right, but he continued driving straight ahead until the shield of the anti-tank gun hit a wall of snow on both sides of the road. Immediately, a group of Feldgendarmes appeared near us and intended to pull our vehicle off the road, but they soon found out the uselessness of their attempts, as our vehicle was too heavy. Accompanied by their horrible swearing, we moved back and forth several times until finally we managed to get back on the road. Afterwards, the terrain made it possible for us to get off the road, and we were able to reach the end of the town in a large radius. There was a strong east wind blowing, and this night the temperature dropped to -40 degrees Celsius. The grease in the needle roller bearing was too viscous, so we could only turn the steering wheel with a lot of effort. The following day we tried to make it easier to turn it somehow, but we had no idea how to do it. That was the reason why I left the vehicle with its crew and went alone to the position of our company, which was the 1st Company of the Reconnaissance Battalion of the SS Division Das Reich. On January 21st, I found out that the command post of our division was located in Mozhaisk. I managed to catch a passing vehicle on the highway that was heading east until, a bit later, all traffic completely stopped. All the way down the road that the eye could see, all the convoys had stopped, and most of the drivers and crews of the vehicles were out of them, witnessing a spectacular natural phenomenon to the northeast. The snow gleamed brightly in the cold wind. The spreading sunlight almost blinded us, and 2 rainbows were in the sky, mirroring each other, coming in contact with each other at their peaks. It must have been a mesmerizing sight for thousands of people from Landwehr to see this phenomenon and not be able to forget it for the rest of the war. All that remained in Mozhaisk was a small unit that had been left behind to take the last of the belongings. The reconnaissance battalion was moved to the village of Sechovka, where the Russian divisions launched a counterattack in temperatures of -45 to -48 degrees Celsius, crushing the German defenses near Rzhev. It continued until the beginning of February. It was the beginning of the winter battle for Rzhev, one of the most important battles that Russia fought. Close to the company command post, in a big dark building, was placed an evacuation hospital. There, all the ferocity of the winter war was on show. At the back of the building, under the windows up to the windowsill, amputated arms, legs, feet, and hands were piled up. After each operation, it was all piled here. Frostbite casualties were higher than combat casualties in those horrific winter conditions. The following day, I reached the location of my battalion through Sechovka, which was located in the village of Svinoroika. Svinoroika was taken the day before after a very heavy fight. It was a village with 3 or 4 streets with houses along them. This day was especially tough for our brother unit, a motorized rifle battalion. In the battle for the village of Pisana, they lost 250 men out of 450. Among them, 4 officers and 170 soldiers were killed. There were 450 dead Russian soldiers left lying on the battlefield after the battle. I, along with 3 or 4 of my comrades, who had arrived from Mozhaisk, were welcomed in the early morning by the temperature dropping to -51 degrees Celsius. The road entrance to the village was a somewhat elevated intersection where a destroyed German cannon stood. The wind had blown all the snow from there and built it up in its pits and hollows where the snow was more than a meter deep, making the spot completely uncovered, so that this spot was a perfect target for our Russian friends. Whenever anything passed here, the Russians would immediately shoot from all kinds of tank and anti-tank guns from any distance. With heavy breathing, we finally reached the company command post located at the end of a street descending from the hillside, where we were met by the faces of our comrades smiling. It was clear that they were watching our Russian roulette with keen interest. They informed us that the odds of crossing the area in daylight were 50-50. They had a distinct feeling that I had never had to do such a trick since I had been sent to the repair shop one day, whereas they, freezing from the cold, were doing it almost every day. I gave a report to my commanding officer, Hauptsturmführer Poke, who seated himself in a corner of the hut. This hut was the command post, which over the next few days was reinforced with several rows of ceiling and wall planking, so it could come off as a proper bunker after all. Accompanying him in the hut was Untersturmführer Pri from the 1st Company. However, my duel with luck was not over that day. Untersturmführer Pri stood with me near the window and began to explain the current situation to me. Meanwhile, a mortar shell flew through the window right between us and hit the back wall without detonating. It cut his face with small wood and glass pieces, but nobody could have identified the scratches as wound. Everything seemed as if he had cut himself with a razor, merely a minor incident. After some time, I was outside with Zeprinesh from Steinmark, the front driver, and Rudi Toner, radio operator and rear driver, along with Hermann Bühler, machine gunner, and Untersturmführer Pri were the crew of the last 8-wheeled reconnaissance vehicle left in the company. We no longer had any four-wheeled vehicles left. They had just started to explain what things had happened in recent weeks, when a projectile slammed into the ground a fair distance away from us. It was so far away that neither of us made any attempt to take cover. Nevertheless, small pieces of shrapnel flew to our group, and two of our comrades were wounded in the abdomen. The wounds were not deep, so Seprinesh humorously shouted, "Hooray! First message!" Despite this, they were transported to the dressing station. This was the reason why I moved to their vehicle as driver, together with Hermann Bühler from Balingen as machine gunner. He was definitely one of those guys who you could rely on to trust blindly in any situation. After an armored vehicle such as ours was hit in the village of Puhovica in the Pripyat marshes, the entire crew died in the burning vehicle. We were always happy to see Bühler and Wiemer Kreis in our crew when we went on a reconnaissance mission. Though he lost his big toe from frostbite during the retreat from the town of Ruza, and though it was very hard for him to move, he never stayed in the hospital and rejoined our company. But whenever he removed his boot somewhere in the shelter to change the cloth that covered what used to be the toe, the smell was so terrible that they were ready to kick him out into the snow and frost. Our reconnaissance vehicle had a limited capability. Two wheels were flattened after repairs, and the gun turret could not rotate, it was simply stuck. Therefore, our vehicle was like a self-propelled vehicle in terms of gunfire. But in these crucial days, it was undoubtedly an inestimable and powerful support for the infantrymen lying in the snow. It was a week when the night temperature dropped below -50°C a few times. Any impurity in the gasoline, water for example, immediately clogged the carburetor, and then we had to disconnect the carburetor from the fuel pump, which was very difficult to handle at such terrible temperatures. It was possible to do this only for a couple of minutes, after which it was necessary to get into the shelter again to warm up. The cold and the extreme fury caused tears to stream down our faces. These were some of the worst days I had experienced during the war. It took a run up to the engine every 2 or 3 hours to start it up to keep our vehicle running. On my first night, the moment that followed in my nightmares happened to me. I was not yet privy to all the details of the area and woke up Hermann Bühler to accompany me to the vehicle. We got inside the vehicle and drove for some distance, all the while turning the steering wheel back and forth, working out its system. Unexpectedly, the steering wheel stopped turning. I jumped off the vehicle to take a look to find out what was wrong. As I looked under the vehicle, I was shocked for the rest of my life. There was a Russian lying on the frame of the vehicle, and it felt like he was clutching one tire. It took a few seconds before I was conscious again. All over the village of Svinoroika, there were snow-covered dead Russians scattered around. I ran over one of these dead soldiers, and his stiffened limbs were completely in the bottom of the vehicle. We made an effort to get him out of there, but it was impossible to do so. Without any other way, I grabbed a saw, crawled close to the Russian, and cut off his hands. It was exceedingly gruesome. The Russian was an old man, a typical man with a long beard. We were very close to each other. Certainly the saw was moving his body a bit, and he seemed to be shaking his head disapprovingly. I was about to be robbed of my sanity, but there was no other alternative. Only a few incidents during the entire war have shocked me in the same way. The Winter War is totally different from any other war. No clear and visible front line existed anymore. The buildings, any kind of shelter from the cold, were the first targets for everyone, and of course the basis of all tactical planning. Those who were unable to warm themselves in any building after hours of being on the front line had very low odds of surviving such low temperatures. Without the ingenuity of men of all ranks, skis, sleds, improvised equipment to adapt weapons and vehicles to low temperatures, and the unknown challenges associated with the cold while supplies were very irregular, and without a strong confidence in the ability to bear all the challenges and finally crush the enemy, even an outstanding command would not have been sufficient to win this winter battle for Rzhev. Fortunately, we had this type of command represented in the person of General Model, the extraordinary commander of the Third Army. Most times at night, or when the blizzard began and the snow blinded our eyes, reconnaissance patrols or small units would enter small towns and villages or disrupt communications between them. While everybody said that the enemy front was to the west and north of us, the Russians could appear in even greater numbers from the east and south. Being a messenger, a corpsman sending wounded soldiers to the rear, mostly volunteers were called up for this, going for supplies. It was all suicidal and very often resulted in death. When we heard the alarm, "The Russians are here!" in the night, sometimes 2 or 3 times a night, after which one hut after another was lighted up by the lights of gunfire, Hermann Buehler and I would rush outside and run to the vehicle side by side, getting into it at the same time. As many of my comrades, he mistrusted automatic weapons. Too many assault rifles jammed in such low temperatures. He always used a Russian carbine. As for myself, I always kept my automatic under my fur jacket, and it had never betrayed me. We were good at distinguishing the Russians against the white snow, as they had no winter camouflage clothing in this area, and were clearly distinguishable in their brown overcoats. Consequently, we were quick to spot them, although their usual battle cry of "Hooray!" sounded now only sporadically. On the next morning, most of those who had been killed were already snow-covered. Here and there, a hand-to-hand fight raged when the enemy came too close. One day in such a situation, by chance for the most part, Hermann hit a Russian in the heart with his bayonet, and instantly his body convulsed, and at night he was a frozen corpse. The next morning, we found him in the same position, with his face toward our vehicle, with one leg bent at the knee, his body straight, his hands in the same position in which he had been holding his rifle when death caught him, except that the rifle had fallen down. As the bullet hit the face, you could sometimes spot the frozen little drops of blood spreading radically away from the entry wound on the ice-covered soldier. A frost at -50 degrees can do something you would not see under any other conditions. It was war in its horrible and terrible shape. On January 23rd, in the village of Svinoroika, our battalion was under attack from 3 sides, supported by artillery. A terrible meat grinder lasted for hours. After the last man able to hold a weapon was thrown into the fight, only then, with very heavy losses, we managed to push the enemy away from the village. All the headquarters and auxiliary units were engaged in the battle. At that time, the liaison unit, led by Untersturmführer Brummer, in particular distinguished itself. Obersturmführer Krug, who had joined the reconnaissance battalion only a few days earlier, had been put in command of a company, found himself, together with his infantrymen, engaged in one of the fiercest places in this desperate battle against a superior enemy. He managed, in spite of a penetrating wound in his right elbow, to lead his men through an almost hopeless situation, and to set the situation in our favor, destroy the enemy, and hold that part of the village. In the midst of this chaos, it sometimes happened that men came under their own fire. There were no more attacks for the next 3 days, but the firing continued with raids by assault and reconnaissance units from all directions. As much as possible, our so-called tank was involved in the affair. Shooting a couple of rounds from our gun, we were forced to shift position to avoid being overwhelmed by the fire of Russian tanks and anti-tank guns, against which our badly armored, iron sheet-covered armored vehicle had no protection. Also, our hut was a shelter for Hauptsturmführer Hans Weiss. After Weidinger and before Poquet, he was our company commander. Only a small remnant of his 4th Company remained, so he had almost no work. His sobriquet was Brown Air Bomber, and he had several dark sides to his nature, but he revealed himself from a very different side these days. Our infantrymen rotated every hour, and climbing out of their snowy foxholes, they would arrive at the hut to warm up. Weiss welcomed them with great care. He took off their fur jackets, laid them in the straw bed he had prepared, put hot rocks on their stomachs, he always kept a few in the stove, and covered them with a couple of blankets. It was all accomplished in a completely natural and unobtrusive way. He was a simply selfless, caring person. He accommodated this unusual situation in the best possible way. Quite often, we had no mechanized vehicles to get the wounded out. In these cases, sleds or skis were used. The Russian horses were available in large numbers at that time. Sepp Rinesh, and Rudi Toner were sent to Sichovka in this way. It was a horror to find out that they had died on the day of the 22nd, even though they were only slightly wounded. A long, exhausting ride and a piercing cold wind had been ruinous to them. The fate of many wounded men at this time. Last days of January saw the arrival of many new recruits. After a short training, the young draftees were thrown into this hell of a whirlpool. Most of them had already died after 2 or 3 days, but not from wounds, but from frostbite. They had simply had no chance to be acclimated so quickly. On January 28th, we got the order to take the village of Lantyova. It was planned to launch the attack in 2 columns. We were on the right side of the Svinoroika-Lantyova road. The other column was on the left side of it. We had a visual contact with each other. There was a self-propelled vehicle from the division at the head of the left column. We and our reconnaissance vehicle were at the head of the right column. We were heading toward our target, firing not particularly hard. It was just as difficult for our vehicle as it was for the infantrymen who were stuck in the snow up to their chests. The vehicle was especially difficult to move again after a gunshot-induced halt. The kickback made the vehicle sink even deeper into the falling snow. Then we stopped for a while to weather an attack on the village by diving bombers. Some of the bombs that we could see did not explode, striking the ground. When the Stug went on, we also moved again. A short time later, we saw the self-propelled gun literally blow up. This fact was in no way able to raise our morale. With more fear than we had experienced before, we expected that some gun standing in our way would tear us apart, as we thought had happened to the self-propelled gun. Later we learned that it had been blown up by a mine. After all of this, we no longer had tanks, while a poorly armored reconnaissance vehicle was worthless for such a battle. Yet such hopelessness awakened, in this situation, the desire to risk it all. Following a short battle, the brutal hand-to-hand fighting normal in such situations, Lantyova was taken as we held it, beating back several counterattacks. In comparison with the previous days, the days of January 29th and 30th were peaceful for us. On January 31st, our battalion took Barshovka, having overcome a strong barrage. This combat was part of a joint operation with the Sichovka Group, 1st Motorized Division, and SS Das Reich Division. The fact that our reconnaissance battalion, which was always in the middle of the open snowy expanses, had not yet been wiped out by Russian fire, came as a great surprise. The overall tactical task of this group was to destroy the 29th and 30th Divisions of the Soviet Army, which broke through the German defensive line near Rzhev, at the same time capturing their fortified area. This mission was completed with heavy losses. Now, the Army Corps, which we were part of, was heading north towards Rzhev. Our division, with the exception of the Der Führer Regiment, which had covered the breakthrough where the Russians had crossed the frozen Volga and then held that line, sacrificing itself, carried out flank cover for the west of our forces. The next 3 or 4 days we took no part in the fighting. On February 9th and 10th, I was ordered to head for Sichovka, from where we were taken to Germany for regrouping, while parts of our division were moved to the Rzhev area. Hermann Bühler, who was later killed in Russia, and I said goodbye to a few surviving comrades, most of whom we were never to see again, led by Hauptsturmführer Poquet. He came to be in charge of the battalion after Hauptsturmführer Kmol, who had been the commander of the reconnaissance battalion before him, had his legs torn off by a mine while he was on skis. They were fighting in Rzhev and on the shores of Volga until the end of May as part of the Ostendorf battle group. In the village of Sichovka, we went to visit the graves of Rinesh and Toner. The burying of the dead there was another evidence of the cruelty and disregard for human beings during the war. In any suitable place, the grave pits were dug by blasting anti-tank mines into the frozen ground. Our dead comrades were transported to the burial site by truck. All the bodies were dumped on the ground, and sergeants from different companies tried to identify their men here. Very many of them remained unidentified. They were covered with snow and ice, and wooden crosses were put over the identified ones. It was only with the arrival of spring that it became possible to create real graves for them. There were other 8-wheeled reconnaissance vehicles of the 1st Company here as well. 2 of them were unable to drive themselves. The 3rd was my own, which had reached here without me from Vyazma. The driver, Walter Schulte, had replaced the needle roller bearing grease with diesel fuel. At this temperature, the viscosity of this fluid was sufficient to replace the grease. As I reported the situation to Obersturmführer Ostendorf, I was given orders to dispatch and was instructed to take the last 4 vehicles and the last 12 men left of the armored vehicle crews and head for Germany, to the factory that manufactured our vehicles. Thirsty and starved, in poor winter uniforms, we had left our winter jackets at the company. Taking our defective vehicles on the trailer, we left in 2 workable vehicles in a marching column from Vyazma to Smolensk. Both of those cities were under threat of attack by Soviet paratroopers who had been dropped somewhere in the area between the 2 cities. It was with great trouble in Smolensk that I obtained the necessary documents for us to be loaded on the train at Rostlavel. I got them from the commandant's office, which, as I recall its name, was in charge of all transportation in the central sector of the Russian front. But we had to go to Rostlavel first. From there, we had to reach Leipzig by rail via Orsha, Minsk, Brest-Litovsk, and Warsaw. The transport commandant's office was located in a special train, 4 passenger wagons and 1 locomotive. The train was camouflaged well in the forest, I think not that far from Cotton, which later uncovered its dark secret. To find their hideout, I needed to spend several days. No doubt they were in contact with people of higher rank there and dealt mainly with the affairs of the corps and divisions. Who was going to handle the matter of a few armored vehicles back then? Weeks passed from the time we left Sechavka and reached the gates of our home in Leipzig. I would like to end my story with Otto Wiedinger's statement about the significance of the Battle of Rzhev in the story of our division. The winter battle for Rzhev has no precedents or any parallels in the entire war history, since this episode is one of a kind. The army group, having depleted all its forces, having been brutally hit and falling back under terrifying midwinter conditions, was on the verge of destruction by an advancing superior enemy force with fresh troops and complete logistics. After the Russians had successfully completed an operation to break through the defenses at the junction of the 2 armies, they almost managed to surround our troops for the first time. But the breathing and bleeding armies pushed forward in a single rush and were able to turn the tide of the battle, managing to avoid a lethal for themselves encirclement, putting their enemy in there instead. It was an unprecedented joint heroic deed of the troops and command, which was a great combination of the struggle in a joint front and the operation to encircle the enemy, which initiated its retreat with all the forces of its support. The result of this struggle not only indicated the saving of Army Group Center, but also had even more deep consequences. Ultimately, it was salvific for the entire campaign in Russia. But this miracle on the Volga could not have taken place without a number of objective reasons. It would not have been possible without the excellent command of the forces, without the incomparable ability to make a way out of any difficult situation and effectively cover any hole, which was superbly represented in the face of the fascinating abilities of Obergeneral Model. But this miracle would not have been achieved if the Russian soldiers' bravery, willingness to sacrifice, steadfastness, and indestructible strength of will to bear all the misfortunes had not been demonstrated. Call of War is a free online PvP strategy game about World War II. Choose your own unique strategy, engage in epic battles, and take over the world. You can receive an exclusive gift. For this, click on the link in the description and get 13,000 gold and 1 month of premium subscription for free. Offer available for 30 days only. Don't waste time. Click on the link in the description, choose your country, and pave your way to victory. That is all for today. If you enjoyed the video, give it a like and support the channel by subscribing. Bye everyone. See you later.